A very good afternoon to you. I am Howard Feldman. This is the Synthesis podcast, and from time to time we chat with interesting people where we try and get some different perspectives as to what is going on in our broader environment. Jan Vermeulen is the technology editor at MyBroadband. A very, very good afternoon, and thanks for taking the time to speak to us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so let's talk about this whole data breach. During the time of COVID, a lot of us working remotely, we've definitely seen an increase in the number of hackers, of breaches. What is really going on? Set the scene for us.
Sure. In this particular case, we are looking at a leak. It was initially just thought to be a leak of data, not a breach of data, from Experian, a credit bureau here in South Africa. And it's actually a multinational, but with operations here in South Africa. They acquired a local operation called CompuScan. And the situation as it was painted, let's actually take it from the beginning. The first thing that happened was the South African Banking Risk Information Center, SABRIC, issued a press release to say there was a leak of data from Experian affecting 20-odd million South Africans, and it caused quite a lot of panic when this press release was issued, as you can rightly imagine. And so Experian was very quick to release a statement of its own saying, nobody panic. What had happened here was someone had allegedly fraudulently obtained data from Experian by impersonating someone. They said that they were someone that they weren't, and a client of Experian's, and then tricked Experian into giving up or giving out the data that it gives out to businesses through the normal course of business, right? This is what credit bureaus do, which is what I think a lot of people still don't realize, even despite this huge controversy, is this is what credit bureaus do. If you can afford to pay them and you pass their vetting process, they will sell you the data. Right? Like there's nothing in South African law stopping that from happening. And in fact, credit bureaus' business is protected by South African law for good reason, because they form a critical part of the National Credit Act. So if there's no way to check people's creditworthiness, which is a function that these credit bureaus provide, then how are you going to enforce some of the requirements of the National Credit Act in terms of, less, ethical, I guess, operators extending loans to people who can't afford them. And so, part of the National Credit Act was to try and deal with that problem. And so these credit bureaus fulfill an incredibly important function, but the issue of amassing and selling of South African, and not just South African, but in this particular case, South African people's personal information remains an unaddressed concern. And so I was kind of hoping that the Experian saga would lead to a larger discussion about that, but instead, what's happened is a very strange turn of events. So Experian came out and said not to panic. This is all that happened, and naturally, people were like, "What do you mean? This is all that happened? This is people's personal information." And to be clear, the initial statements from Experian were that no one's personal information was available on the open internet. But then a reporter, Tefo Mohapi at iAfrican, hooked up with Troy Hunt from Have I Been Pwned, which is a breach or data leak notification service. You can visit them, pwned.com. So it's a hacker term. You can then subscribe your email address, and if your email address is picked up in data leaks, then this service run by Troy Hunt alerts you of it. It's a very valuable service, and it's even been integrated like right into Firefox now. And I've worked with Troy before, so I can actually vouch for him. The he and Tefo Mohapi worked together and found that this data is in fact available on the open internet. So Tefo Mohapi then went back to Experian and said, explain this. And Experian said, yes, we've discovered what appears to be this data on the open internet, and we're working to contain the problem. But the fact is, much like the master deeds leak of a couple of years ago, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? People's personal information have now been exposed. But also, if it's any consolation, this isn't the first time. And so part of the message I want to tell people is that assume your ID number is no longer private. Treat it as if it, so this is a difficult thing. Do not go handing it out willy-nilly as if it is no longer private. Still treat it as a piece of personal important data.
But you assume that it isn't.
Yeah, but in terms of your own security practices, assume it's public. Right, so do not think of your ID number as a secure piece of information that can be used as a password or even as a way to positively, uniquely identify you anymore. And this goes out to not just individuals, us individuals who need to protect ourselves from identity theft, but to businesses at large in South Africa who work with people's personal or work with people on a personal level like that, and sometimes require a kind of identification mechanism and know your customer or something like that, is that ship has sailed. The
Right.
ID number is no longer an identifier that can be used in that way.
What's interesting to me is well, we speak about it's almost easier and less, we need to feel less responsible if we've been hacked rather than if we've been tricked. This, to me, to some extent, is a bit low tech. It's like people said that say, "Oh, my Facebook has been hacked," but really, what happened was they were at an internet cafe or at the gym, and they were on Facebook but didn't log out. That's actually not quite the same thing, is it?
Right. And the thing is that unauthorized access of an online service and your accounts, it doesn't matter how it happens. Even if you, and this, I will say of our laws, I do believe that they recognize this. So whether a criminal has gone to extreme lengths to break into a system to gain access to your stuff, or whether you just left yourself logged in and they then come and steal your stuff that way, the crime is the same.
Right.
And so, yes, while one can argue about the levels of responsibility, I do think it's important not to victim blame, but at the same time make people aware that that they have some responsibility to take steps to protect themselves. It's a dangerous world out there. And so, for the same reason that, one would warn people not to walk around in crime hotspots wearing, valuable jewelry, in the same way, people need to treat their personal data, and that means everything from, if you use a public computer, make sure you sign yourself out, use strong passwords, and, be suspicious of the kinds of scams and attacks like phishing emails. So as you say, this was a fairly low-tech hack, but hackers I know would regard it as a hack nonetheless. It's called social engineering, and it's where someone, through whatever tricks, whatever confidence tricks, a con, right, would convince another party to give them access to stuff that they shouldn't have access to. And if you listen to the guy from Catch Me If You Can, whose name escapes me now, but that kind of check fraud half of it was a confidence scam, right? You trick the bank by being extremely charming and charismatic into cashing the checks for you. And so even a con, even though we've got a different word for it, there's nothing wrong with calling a con a hack in a tech scope. If someone
so what you're saying is I'm wrong, actually, because say if you leave or if you are conned into sharing information via tech, or if you leave yourself logged in on a public computer, we still consider it a hack.
Yes, I would.
I've been very judgmental around this, is what you say, in a very, very nice way.
But that's fine, because sometimes people need a swift kick in the pants to make sure that they understand their responsibility here as well. Yes, you've been the victim of a crime, but also you must be made aware of the kinds of things criminals will do to gain access to your stuff and how valuable that stuff is. I think that's part of the problem, is people don't even realize how valuable their personal information is. You know, you think, oh, who am I? I'm not you know, Chris Hemsworth. I'm not Henry Cavill. Who wants my personal data? But the fact is, if you have a cent of money that a hacker can steal, they'll try. If it's convenient for them to, they'll do it.
Right. It's interesting, because there was also a hacker vigilante that I wanted to ask you about.
Oh, right.
Tell us that story.
Sure. Not all hackers are bad. I'm
Exactly.
really great. We get to chat about this. So hacking has become a word synonymous with criminal activity, and that's unfortunate, because the genesis of the term is actually in something far more noble. Hacking referred to, you know, a kind of tinkering or obsessively working on, you know, something or usually technological in nature, or finding a clever way to solve a problem or a workaround to something. And so there are still, and have always been, good hackers. And I would classify this vigilante as one with, you can argue about the methods, but certainly the intentions seem noble. Now, this hacker vigilante, or a hacker Batman, I like to call him sometimes, went by the name the janitor, or if you'll allow me, Dr. Cyborkian. And so that's a play on Dr. Kevorkian. And what this hacker, the reason he played, this is part of hacker culture, is this kind of playfulness with language. And the reason he called himself those two things is because he would clean up the internet, janitor, by euthanizing devices that were insecure.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, right. So
now I get the reference, the name.
Yeah, and so part of what he did, and I'll get to what he did here in South Africa, but part of what catapulted this particular hacker to fame is the development of a virus or worm called BrickerBot. And so what had emerged was there was this massive global botnet of, I think it was like CCTV cameras or something, that were left vulnerable. And what attackers would do is they would just load their malicious code into these Internet of Things devices and aim them at websites for DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, and just wipe them off the internet. And so this guy looked at this problem. He said, hang on a second, I think I can do something about this. And he wrote a piece of malware. I mean, regardless of what you think about his intentions, this is malicious software that went all over the internet and bricked, is what we call it, these Internet of Things devices, the CCTV cameras and whatever else. The botnet creators had hijacked for their DDoS attacks. So in other words, he was denying the attackers access to the vulnerable hardware by destroying the vulnerable hardware. And he doesn't always destroy stuff. It so happened to be in this case that, in a lot of cases, he left the devices unrecoverable. But in some cases, what he would do is he would just be really annoying. So he would soft brick the device. And so then you'd have to go through a factory reset process to get it back up and running again. And he would do that every couple of hours. So you get it back up and running and working, and then you just come through and do it again, and do it again, and do it again, until hopefully eventually someone climbs in the internet and Googles, why is my CCTV camera breaking the whole time? And then, people hopefully realize, oh, there is an ongoing attack, and the reason for this ongoing attack against your hardware is that it's fundamentally insecure. Please patch it. Now, what the janitor did in South Africa is he specifically went after ADSL routers on the Telkom network. I think it was back in 2018 or 2017. It might have been 2017. And This is a widespread problem. Now only Telkom was mentioned, and his only attention was on Telkom. But this problem is widespread, and it's not just in South Africa, but since we're in South Africa, that's what we care about, where internet service providers sell clients routers and then don't properly support those routers after selling them. And so these routers end up being vulnerable, left vulnerable to all kinds of exploits, and get, seconded in these types of DDoS attacks and all kinds of untoward activity, or they get broken in and they get modified in a way that might even let an attacker snoop on your internet traffic, which could give them a way into your bank account. Usually not, because banks are very careful and about these kinds of things, but with enough data and enough access, through these exploits, it might be possible to take it to even that level. And so, this Dr. Cyborkian, or the janitor, who had been, who had achieved some level of global infamy for Brickabot, had actually turned his attentions to us here in little old South Africa, and Telkom in particular, to demonstrate a larger global problem that he felt needed fixing.
It's so interesting because we have a strange relationship with hackers. If we think about the Gupta leaks in South Africa, that changed the course of this country. If we didn't have that, if somebody didn't behave in a way that is very clearly illegal in terms of most likely illegal, how they obtain this information, we wouldn't know the half of what's going on. We've seen it with WikiLeaks. We've seen this all around the world. But on the other hand, it requires illegality and criminality in order to further these goals. It's a very complicated relationship, surely.
It is, and there are some easy ways to fix some glaring holes in legislation that criminalizes activity that really shouldn't be criminal. In particular, by adding a public in the public interest.
It's almost like you do around, libel, where or defamation of character, where we say, it's true and it's in the public interest.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, and that's the kind of thing that we could really use more of in our current cybercrime legislation around the world, but here in South Africa as well, and certainly something I've seen my hacker friends advocate for, because even if it's something that's not as drastic or as large scale as what the janitor did across the Telkom network. It can be, for example, we've got I call them security researchers now, to distinguish between hacker and malicious intent and noble intent. But hackers, they're all hackers, and they would call themselves white hats or black hats after the cowboy movie. Old cowboy movie references, in old black and white cowboy movies, the good guy cowboys would wear white hats and the bad guy cowboys would wear black hats, so that the audience could see who the good guys and the bad guys were. Modern cinema, it's more complicated than that, because you never know who the good guys and the bad guys are.
Modern life is more complicated.
Yes, exactly. Art imitates life, right? So, but in this particular case, we've got hackers that, for example, would go through a company's databases for the sake of simplicity, and see where they are exposed, and then they would then try to contact the company to let them know, hey, this is exposed, you need to fix it. But often the companies either ignore it, or they don't have proper channels set up to deal with reports like this, and so it goes unaddressed. And then these hackers would either leak it into the public domain to try and force the company to act, or they go to journalists that they might have relationships with and say, hi, I found this thing, will you please responsibly disclose this as far as you can, to force this company to fix this glaring security hole. And we've seen that happen multiple times in South Africa. And I've had companies that are very upset and threaten legal action and all kinds of stuff. And I go, yes, technically you might be able to argue that this is illegal, but firstly, you won't get a conviction in South Africa. And secondly, this guy did you a solid. Like he found a glaring security problem in your network. He let you know about it, and exposed it in such a way that the minimum amount of damage could be done. This could have been so much worse for you than it is, and this guy didn't even charge you for the privilege. And so, yeah, it's a tricky one. Obviously, when you're in that situation, when you're a company who's going through that, you will, especially young startups, you will feel very attacked, very hard done by such a thing. By a hacker coming through and doing a security probe of your network or online systems. But understand that in most cases, it's not personal. These guys just happen to stumble across a security vulnerability and report it. They are taking a massive risk in a lot of cases because but it's because it's illegal. Yeah, so sorry, I got kind of off track there, but the bottom line is absolutely there is a problem where a lot of this gets lumped in under the same crimes as we're trying to protect ordinary people from. And unfortunately, yeah, it does come down hard on hackers who have more noble intent as well.
Ransomware. Would you advise a company that has been hacked and has been frozen out of their own systems, would you advise them to pay and move on and just deal with the pain? Or on principle, would you advise people not to?
Yeah, on principle, I would advise against paying ransoms. But obviously, principle is a beautiful thing until it gets confronted with reality, right? So in the vast majority of cases, paying the ransom is going to be a mistake, because unless you've got incredibly technical people who can verify that paying the ransom will actually yield the desired result, there's somebody extorting you like that. Like once they've got your money, there's no incentive for them to unlock your files. Your files might already be deleted for all you know. And so,
amongst these thieves.
No. And so my blanket advice is no, but there have been exceptions. And in fact, Garmin reportedly paid a ransom recently after its network got attacked, and probably set a terrible precedent. But when you're desperate and your back's to the wall, and the services that millions of people have come to depend upon are under threat, then, as I said, principle is a lovely thing. But when you need to get online and you weigh the cost of your services being offline against the cost of the ransom, and you go, it is cheaper to pay the ransom, then who am I to judge?
Right. It's a very difficult one, and as you say, just take us through that Garmin situation, because that I know that although I look like an athlete, I'm not really, but a lot of my friends are, and they were outraged, absolutely outraged. It was almost like I think it was bigger than COVID in some circles.
Yeah, it was just at either at the outset of the pandemic or just before this whole thing went down. So it was bigger than it overshadowed COVID at the time. Since March, though, nothing has been able to. But yes, effectively, a bunch of hackers, attackers, had got into Garmin systems, had locked Garmin out of its own essential services. Garmin apparently picked up on this while it was happening, and was, according to it, able to limit some of the damage. But that meant bringing all of its systems offline, and not bringing it online for fear of it being infected with the ransomware, right? And so, obviously, my advice to any company is always make sure that you have backups that you can fall back on, so that if you are hit by an attack like this, you can just take it on the chin and say, whoops, or not, maybe whoops is the wrong term, but
I don't think anyone's using whoops in this.
Yeah, but like, obviously we made a mistake. There was a security hole in our systems. like anyone is going to have, like, you know, it's almost a case of, it's not if you get hacked, it's when you get hacked now. And so because software is so incredibly complex, building software with zero security flaws is probably impossible. And so you're going to get hit, or in all likelihood will get hit by something like this eventually. If you have the necessary backups in place, then you can try to figure out where the security hole is. That's going to be your challenge in the crisis moment, is figuring out where the security hole is, fixing it, and then falling back on your backups, so that you can avoid paying an extortion, you know, demand from someone who really doesn't deserve it. You know, unlike Garmin, of course, I should qualify that Garmin has not publicly disclosed or confirmed that it paid the ransom. This information comes from sources in the industry, you know, with the likes of Bloomberg reporting the news. And so, you know, I don't think Garmin will ever officially admit, at least not for the next 10 years, that it's paid a ransom, because that paints a target on your back. Right. The second that you pay a ransom, you are advertising to other extortionists out there that you're willing to pay. And so hopefully an attack like this is not just a wake-up call to Garmin, but everybody else, of the kinds of practices you need to put in place to make sure that if you are the victim of such an attack, that you can fall back on backups and not and that be cheaper than paying the ransom. That's the key thing. While we're on the topic of ransomware, I've been using the new anti-ransomware feature built into Windows, and it is extremely cumbersome. And so that's part of the problem, is the defenses. The defenses against this stuff. So the anti-ransomware thing built into Windows 10 now reminds me of how UAC, I don't know how many people remember that, but like when UAC with Windows Vista, when that was first introduced, and those annoying pop-ups come up on your screen. Are you sure you want to let the app do this? Are you sure you want to let the app do that? That's what this Windows anti-ransomware feels like. It's extremely early days. And exactly, and so most people are just not gonna end up using it. I've now managed to train it to the point where it seems to be working okay, but there's what I will give Microsoft is at least they've started development on this, even if it's not a feature that's not quite ready for prime time. It's available, and if people are really concerned about ransomware and ransomware protection, there's options like that are built right into your operating system that you can use today with a lot of effort in setting it up, but it's there. The alternative is make sure that you've got backups, and not just cloud backups, right? So those of us who have come to rely on Dropbox and other services as sort of like a cloud backup, like I've never had to worry about reformatting a machine that was giving me trouble for probably the last 7 years, because I know all of my critical stuff is backed up to the cloud. But smart ransomware will find those cloud attached drives on your machine. If they've got enough access to your machine, they'll encrypt that stuff too. So don't just rely on cloud backups. You need to make sure that you've got backups that are not attached to machines that can be compromised, so that if you are hit by an attack like this, you can fall back without having to worry about losing too much data.
Unfortunately, that's all we do have time for. Jan Vermeulen, editor-at-large, MyBroadband. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. I'm Howard Feldman. This is the Synthesis of Podcast. You can subscribe by hitting the word subscribe. It's really just as simple as that. I do thank you for taking the time to watch this. Jan Vermeulen, thank you again. And I look forward to our next conversation.